This is the Argument Ninja Podcast, episode 31. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. This is the Argument Ninja Podcast, the show dedicated to the art and science of critical thinking. I'm your host, Kevin Delaplante, and this episode is split into two parts. First, I'm going to give an update about what I've been up to this fall since the last podcast episode was posted back in September. And second, I'm going to talk about the 3 new videos that I just uploaded to YouTube that are a continuation of the sketchbook video series I've been doing on critical thinking and tribalism. This set of videos is on cognitive biases, tribalism, and politics. I'm going to talk about those videos here and briefly review the argument I'm trying to make in them, but I'm going to publish the audio for those on the next podcast episode, episode 32. I encourage you to check out the videos. There's a lot of visual content in them. I'll have links in this episode description and in the show notes, but the audio actually makes for a good podcast episode. I think it stands up on its own too. All right, moving on to our first topic. What have I been up to? It's been a while since I published a new episode. I do regret that. It wasn't part of my plan. The last episode was around mid-September, and I spent most of that episode talking about the new Vocabulary of Science video course that I had been working on over the summer and that I had just published on the Critical Thinker Academy website. So, why the delay since then? Well, let's work backwards. There are 3 things to mention. First, as I mentioned, I created these new videos. They took a while to produce. They have a lot of simple cartoon drawings in them, over 100 in fact, and the whole production process is fairly time-consuming when you include research, writing, drawing, recording, editing, and so forth. So that's one thing that has taken up a chunk of time. Second, I was at a conference in early November. I was very honored to be invited by Houston Community College, which hosts an annual Humanities and Philosophy conference, to give a talk as a keynote presenter. It was a really great trip. I haven't been around professional philosophers in quite a while, so it was really nice to be part of that environment again for a short while anyway. The talk I gave was on critical thinking and tribalism. So through October, I spent some time preparing for that. And it was actually while I was working on that talk that I started outlining the content for the new videos that I just published. Now, the third item that I want to mention that has taken up a chunk of time this fall is consulting work. I haven't talked much about this, but I did say way back in my business update last January that in 2018, I'd likely be more involved in consulting work this year, and that has proven to be the case. What kind of consulting? Broadly speaking, business consulting for small to mid-sized businesses. I don't do this on my own. I work with my good friend John Lenker, who runs Lenker Consulting, which is a Minnesota-based consulting firm. In this capacity, I'm basically a contract employee of Lenker Consulting. You can check out his company site at lenker.com, lenker.com. My relationship with John goes back to 2016 when he signed up as a patron of mine on Patreon. John was inspired by my vision of an online critical thinking training studio, the Argument Ninja Academy, and he wanted to support that project and my work. Now, he also knew that I had a funding problem that was an ongoing source of stress for me, so he kept his eye open for jobs that I could do for clients of his. For example, John designed a whole new marketing and branding campaign for Space Angels, which is an aerospace investing company. And part of that campaign was creating a podcast where the CEO of Space Angels would interview players in the aerospace industry. So, knowing that I had some experience with setting up and delivering a podcast, he offered me the job of setting up the podcast hosting and consulting on some of the copy and the marketing strategy around the podcast launch. So the way it works is that John sets up a contract for this task with me as a third-party contract employee of Lenker Consulting. Space Angels pays John, then John pays me. If you're curious, I invite you to check out their site at spaceangels.com. That's all John's work. And the marketing plan and the podcast have been a huge boost for Space Angels. This was a successful venture all around. I worked on another Lenker client project in 2017 and early 2018, which involved a lot of research and analysis related to market opportunities in the social media and social networking space. We did a lot of remote team-based work, and my job focused on overseeing and advising on the research end. And I was heavily involved in drafting a largest report that synthesized what the team had learned over a 6-week process, which was delivered to the client. Now, where I'm going with this is that this past fall, I was involved in another consulting project with Linker, which I can't disclose details about, but this one involved designing a marketing and training plan for a sizable company. I took the lead on the training and instructional design and knowledge management component of this consulting job. This job also required a series of in-person visits to the client headquarters. So John and I had to fly in early October and fly again right at the end of October, and we had to prepare presentations for these visits. So this consulting work was the main reason why it's been as long as it has since the last podcast episode. At any rate, I'm very grateful for these opportunities to make some extra money, but I'm even more grateful for the opportunity to expand my knowledge base and my skill set and acquire some experience working with real people and real businesses outside of my personal space and outside of academia. This is all really valuable to me. Now, neither John or I want this consulting work to take up so much time that it prevents me from developing my own business and creating my own content. So I'd like it to average out to no more than 20% of my work time. So like 1 day a week on average, with the understanding that in practice, the work isn't spread out evenly. You work in sprints with less busy times in between. And another benefit of the consulting work I've done and the supporting research that I had to do in order to do that work is that it's given me new insight into how to advance and scale the education and training programs that I would ultimately like to create that are more ambitious than the video courses I've been making so far. Once you've spent some time designing training programs for another company and developing plans for actually building those programs, it's easier to see how those same strategies could be used to build your own training programs. At any rate, if you're listening and you run a small to mid-sized business and you'd like my input, I'm available. But my services will be through Linker Consulting. I won't do work with businesses as a freelancer. With individuals, yes. If you want some coaching on how to make money selling courses on Udemy, I can do that. You can call me. If you're looking for ways to improve your business and you want my input on that, call John. So I think that's it. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. That's what I've been up to this fall. Now, moving on to our second topic. Let's talk about those new tribalism videos. Over on YouTube, about a week ago, at the time this episode comes out, I uploaded 3 videos with the title Cognitive Biases, Tribalism and Politics. It's really one long video cut into 3 parts. So the titles have part 1 of 3, part 2 of 3, and part 3 of 3 in the title name. And each one has a subtitle to help differentiate them a bit. When you add them up, it's about 36 minutes of video. The first 2 parts are about 9 minutes long each, and the third part is about 18 minutes, with about 2 minutes of that at the end where I mention Patreon and some other comments. I put a video link card at the end of the videos, so at the end of part 1, for example, you can just click to load part 2 and so on. Now, like I said in the intro, I'm going to publish the audio as a separate episode so you can listen to the whole thing here on the podcast. The series altogether is designed as one long argument that was inspired by 3 things. First, I received a question from a listener about what cognitive biases one should be familiar with if one's goal is to think more critically about politics. Second, I've had several conversations recently about the effect that political polarization has on one's ability to think clearly and critically about the very political issues that one feels strongly about. What if it's the case that the more strongly a person identifies with a political orientation or a political tribe, the more prone they are to the distorting effects of certain cognitive biases? I think there's lots of evidence that this is in fact the case. So the next question is, what are the implications of this? Is this an argument against political activism? Is this an argument against holding political beliefs strongly? So that was a set of issues I wanted to explore in this video. Now, the third source of inspiration was the release of a new report just recently called Hidden Tribes, a study of America's polarized landscape, which I thought was very interesting. The authors use a combination of large-scale surveys and interviews to learn about how Americans vary in their political and cultural views. They did some statistical factor analysis on the surveys to identify 7 distinct tribes in the American political landscape, ranging from what they call progressive activists on the left to traditional and devoted conservatives on the right. These are the wings of the distribution, and they're the most politically active and polarized segments. And they're almost diametrically opposed on every policy and cultural issue. People within the wings feel that they're in a pitched battle against the other side, that the other side is a serious threat to a valued way of life. However, according to this report, progressive activists only make up about 8% of the population, and traditional and devoted conservatives together only make up about 25%. So a third of the country is in the polarized wings, and they make a lot of noise. They're the ones you're most likely to encounter on the news or on social media. But the report tries to show that most of the country is not polarized in this way. The other 2/3 of the country form a block of 4 political tribes that the authors label as traditional liberals, passive liberals, moderates, and a category they call the politically disengaged. And this whole central block they call the exhausted majority. They're exhausted in the sense that they're fatigued by U.S. politics today, and they feel forgotten in political debate. But the people in this central block, the report claims, are more flexible ideologically than people in the activist wings. They're more likely to be comfortable with adopting mixed positions where on some issues they're left-leaning and on other issues they're right-leaning. And they're much more supportive of their leaders finding political compromise amongst opposing groups. The people in the activist wings, by contrast, are more ideologically pure and more likely to resist compromise. So, I can't speak to the methodological quality of the study or how reliable the conclusions are that the authors draw, but this portrait of the American political landscape is certainly one that I recognize, and one that I think we can better understand if we pay attention to what psychologists and social scientists have been telling us about how our tribal psychology works, and how the worst aspects of tribal psychology are exacerbated by social polarization. So that was another motivation for the videos. I wanted to talk about the psychological and social mechanisms that might explain or give some insight into the phenomena being described in this study. All right, so let's turn now to the videos. The argument that I make in the videos is that our default moral psychology is a pluralistic psychology, in the sense that we all have the capacity to care about and be motivated by lots of different kinds of values. Values having to do with self-interest and individual liberty, the interests and welfare of family and friends, community values, the welfare of strangers, individual rights and the public good, issues about justice and fairness, resisting oppression and domination, and so on. Values that cut across the political spectrum. But when we come to identify strongly with a particular political orientation, like progressivism or conservatism or libertarianism or feminism or environmentalism, that typically involves occupying and identifying with more highly polarized social environments. And when that happens, a whole pile of cognitive biases are activated that are sensitive to this polarization and have the collective effect of distorting our perception and our thinking, and ironically, compromising our ability to think critically and independently about the very issues that people within those tribes care about. So in the video, mostly in part 2, I talk about the combined effects of affect bias, cultural cognition, availability bias, the mere exposure effect, and the focusing illusion. The effect of all of these on our ability to see reality for what it is, and how all of these effects are magnified in our current polarized media environment. It exacerbates us versus them thinking. It increases hostility toward people who we identify with the other side, and it reduces our ability to recognize a diversity of values in these people and often in ourselves. We end up seeing and responding to exaggerated cartoon versions of one another rather than our full humanity and complexity. Now, this story jibes with the conclusions of the study of American political tribes, which claims that people in the less polarized middle block are more willing to think about issues on a case-by-case basis and see more room for common ground and compromise than people in the wings. This would be a prediction of the view that I'm articulating here. Now, the question I take up at the end of the third video is about the implications of all of this for the morality and the rationality of engaging in political activism. What I argue is not that it's wrong or irrational to engage in political activism. What I argue is that there is a cost to doing so that is largely hidden from us, and we owe it to ourselves to become more aware of these costs so that we can make better, more informed decisions about how we pursue our political goals. So what are these hidden costs? They're costs to our critical thinking faculties, our ability to pursue the truth, avoid falsehood, make wise decisions, and think for ourselves with respect to issues that have become polarized, that have become entangled with particular political and cultural identities. I'm arguing that all of these faculties are compromised when reasoning from within one of these polarized environments about issues that have also become polarized. So, just to give a concrete example, if I identify with a progressive liberal political tribe and the issue is gun control, there is enormous social pressure within that tribe to conform my views on guns to the positions that are deemed acceptable within the tribe. I know that I'm supposed to be in favor of bans on certain kinds of guns and tighter gun control laws. I know I'm supposed to believe that the frequency of mass shootings and overall gun violence will be reduced if we impose stricter gun laws. Now, if I identify strongly with this tribe, then it's very likely that I also strongly believe that this is the right position on gun control. And not just believe, that position has become part of my cultural and ideological identity. It's become integrated into my internal psychology. This sets up the conditions for various kinds of confirmation bias and motivated reasoning to influence my thinking on this issue, with the result that everything I experience will reinforce the sincere conviction that my side is right and the other side is wrong. Now, the exact same story is true of people on the other side. Members of conservative political tribes who are strongly pro-gun rights will experience the very same conviction. Everything in their experience will reinforce their view that their side is right and the other side is wrong. This isn't just me saying this. There's overwhelming evidence that this is the case, with the caveat that this is a statistical prediction that admits variation. So not everyone will exhibit biased thinking to the same degree, and not all groups have the same kinds of internal pressures and incentives to conform. I'm not saying that there's perfect symmetry between the left and the right. There's lots of evidence, in fact, that there are asymmetries. But on average, it's still true that groups within highly polarized environments are much more prone to these biasing effects than groups in less polarized environments. Now, if you care about critical thinking values and your own intellectual autonomy, then this should matter to you. This is something you risk sacrificing when you join up. Now, I don't want to downplay the benefits of joining up. By identifying with a polarized political tribe, you get the benefits of social solidarity and associating with like-minded people and feeling like you're part of a whole with a greater purpose. And you get the benefits of working together to achieve collective goals. As a group, you can engage in activism that has a chance of influencing society. That can be very powerful and very attractive, especially if you really care about the issues. But joining up does come with risks. And the risks that I'm drawing attention to here are largely hidden risks. Everything we know about human nature tells us that in these environments, you are cognitively compromised. You experience the world through a tribal lens that exaggerates and distorts social reality, more so than if you were operating within a less polarized environment. But from within your tribe, it feels like you're seeing reality exactly as it is, and that your reasoning is perfectly sound. That's one of the ways that our judgment is compromised. It's one thing to see a visual illusion and know it's an illusion, but be unable to see it differently. It's another thing to not even know that what you're seeing is an illusion. That's closer to the situation that most people are in. So my view is that if more people were aware of these cognitive risks, these risks to their intellectual autonomy, they'd at least have the option of taking them into account when deciding whether to join up or not, or more generally, how they want to pursue their political goals. I'd like to think that more of us would be more cautious, that we'd try to stay clear of environments that aren't good for us from a critical thinking standpoint. However, I don't think it's necessarily irrational to make the choice to join up, even knowing the risks. It all depends on how much you weigh and prioritize these competing values, how much you care about your ability to think clearly and critically for yourself versus how much you care about the political values that matter to you. But ideally, obviously, I would rather find solutions where we don't have to make these trade-offs. Anyway, that's the story I tell in these videos. I don't have any big solutions to reveal. This is literally just me trying to work out my thoughts on these issues and pushing my understanding a little further. The very act of writing and producing these videos and this podcast is the vehicle through which I get to do that, which I'm very grateful for. Now, to change things up a bit and to round out this episode, I want to share some of the things I'm learning about producing content in different formats for different platforms. The content in these videos would make for a very good presentation, like the one I gave in Houston. I made over 100 cartoon drawings, so give me 45 minutes in front of an audience with these slides, and it'll go great. The audience will be engaged all the way through, and it'll be a memorable experience. It also makes for a reasonably engaging podcast experience, even without the visuals. People listening to podcasts expect to allocate some time to it when they get in the car or take the dog for a walk, and they've chosen to follow the show, so they've got some incentive to listen to what you have to say. On YouTube, it's just entirely different. People are scanning and surfing for content, and there's so much competition for attention. If someone's not already an invested follower, it's hard to hook the casual viewer. Most people leave a video without finishing it. If you've got a good punchline or a closing bit at the end, most people don't ever get to it. That's why, even though I really like the video format and I admire content creators who can make engaging single topic videos, as a teacher, I prefer to make content that is intended to be consumed as part of an ongoing relationship with the listener or the viewer, like in an online course where you can select for audiences that are interested in the subject, that want to learn something new, and you can design a sequential learning experience out of shorter videos that is cumulative, that builds over time. So a piece of content can work really well within a course like this, but not work well when you just put the videos up on YouTube. YouTube rewards videos that deliver value as standalone experiences that don't require you to have watched certain videos in advance. In this case, for example, in part 1 of this new video series, I set up the distinction between psychological value pluralism and philosophical value pluralism, which is actually quite important for understanding what I'm doing in parts 2 and 3. But of course, on YouTube, you can't assume that people who come across part 2 or 3 will have watched part 1. So you run the risk of confusing people, or they might leave comments based on false assumptions about what you're doing. That can be frustrating, but it's a problem with trying to present content like this on YouTube. I have people email me sometimes with advice on how to get more traction on YouTube, how to optimize videos for YouTube. I appreciate the advice and the good intentions behind it, and I've studied enough of this to know most of the principles that work on that platform. But the reality is that optimizing for YouTube engagement isn't optimizing for the kind of learning experience that I'm really interested in delivering. The way these videos will work best as a resource for learning is if I break them up into smaller videos and assemble them into a learning sequence in a structured video course that I can deliver on a platform that is optimized for that, like the Critical Thinker Academy or on Udemy. So that's exactly what I'm planning to do with these videos I've done on tribalism and critical thinking. Altogether, when you include the Dangers of Tribalism video, the Our Tribal Intelligence video, the In Our Tribe We Trust video, plus these 3 new videos, that adds up to about 95 minutes of video. So it's an hour and a half of cartoon-based videos. That's a good chunk of a full video course on the topic. I'll need to break up the longer videos further, and I've got plans for a couple more modules, so the whole thing will be longer, but the end result will be a new course for the Academy and for Udemy. My working title for the course is Tribalism, Polarization, and Critical Thinking, a cartoon guide. And it'll be available for patrons and sustaining members of the Academy. Now I'm going to make one more announcement. I've had a couple people ask me about audio versions of the course content at the Critical Thinker Academy. They would like the option to be able to listen to the audio for those courses as they would a podcast. I'd like to offer this option for supporters, and I think there's a way to do it through Patreon. You can create a podcast RSS feed for patrons that they can load into their podcast app to subscribe to exclusive patron-only podcast content. I already do this with some creators that I support on Patreon. It's pretty easy to set up. So this past weekend, I started collecting and organizing audio files. So stay tuned for this option. I think a lot of you will be interested in this. Well, I think that's it for this episode. Like I said, next episode, which I'll put up very shortly, I'll post the audio for this video series. But I do encourage you to check out those videos and the notes for those videos over at kevindelaplante.com. I've got a link in the episode description. I've also got a number of cool ideas brewing for upcoming shows, including the Ask Me Anything episode that I talked about in the last episode in September. I've actually recorded some of that content already. Anyway, thanks as always for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.